Why do people love villains so much? Maybe it's just their cool vibes, but I think it's more than that. I know for me it is. Not only do villains tend to have some of the most iconic looks, they also tend to have some of the most interesting personalities. They're often more complex, morally gray, if not downright evil, and we know by now that they get the best backstories. And by that, yes, I do mean the most tragic. So it's kind of no wonder that people tend to prefer villains to heroes. Not only do they look cool, they also are cool, inside and out. The same way that they're terrifyingly evil on the inside and on the outside. Rotten to the core, you might say, just like me. But despite all that, I think it's time for me to retire my I Heart Villains shirt and get into this video. Because if we know why people like villains, then we can apply all of that to heroes, making them more compelling, more interesting, and ultimately more likely to captivate your readers. So let's get started. And let me know if you want an I Heart Villains shirt, because if enough people are interested, I may just launch a shop where you can buy your very own. Sup peoples, and welcome to another video. As you may know, I am a huge villain fan. They're almost always my favorite characters. But while that sounds cool, it's actually kind of a drag, because most of our time is spent not with the bad guys, but with their antagonists. I mean our protagonists. You know, the good guys. So how do we take our protagonists and make them deserving of that center stage? In this video, I'll be going over my character creation process, why I think so many heroic characters fall flat, and what we can learn from antagonistic characters to make our protagonists better. The first step of my character creation process is a name. Now, you don't have to start this way, but I've personally found fitting a name to an already created character much harder than picking a name and building a character on top of it. I choose names from this giant list I wrote back when I was young and naive and thought I'd always have the time to read an entire book of baby names and pick and choose the ones that I liked. How far away those days feel now. But if you don't have a list of potential baby names that you're now instead using for tortured and miserable novel characters, the internet is your best friend. There are a million and one sites that have great names, and they're usually way better organized than my giant list. Was I really planning to name someone Gower at one point? Actually, that would make a really good last name for a character. Oops, I lost track of time. Am I still filming? Okay, we can salvage this. You'll just help me finish this character. This is Slade Gower, my new Blorbo. I mean, a character I'm working on in a totally normal and not weird or obsessive kind of way. He's from the universe of one of my upcoming projects, Project Vow, but that's not really important yet. After choosing a name, I started deciding other odd tidbits of information about him. First up, his role in the story. Slade is a side character, specifically a police officer that works under Gale, one of the heads of the organization in Project Vow's urban fantasy world. His gender is male, he uses he/him pronouns, and I'll make him straight. You know, for diversity's sake. You gotta fit in your token straight someplace. I'll say that he's 57. He's been working this job for a while and is probably starting to daydream about retirement. Now we get to the fun bits, his physical and aesthetic description. Now you could just label us all as his appearance, but I like to divide the two because one tells us more about his physical makeup and the other more about his personality. Slade is on the shorter side for a guy, about 5'6", so still taller than me unless I wear really thick-soled sneakers, which is precisely why I own so many thick-soled sneakers. He's got dark, slightly graying hair with a bit of body and curl to it, but he tends to slick it down or wear a cap, so you rarely see that. I'll give him piercing blue eyes, like Paul Hollywood's, so that he can unsettle and scrutinize new recruits to his heart's content. He's clean-shaven, I feel like, and really pale. Like you could just picture him brooding in the rain. Now, all of this gives us an image of him physically, and a few aesthetic details as well, like the fact that he shaves every morning, and how he does his hair. But to really understand what he looks like, we have to move on to the aesthetic description. This is where his personality will really start to shine through. Slade wears a lot of button-downs and long, thick coats. I doubt he wears a t-shirt anywhere but at home, even in the summer. I also like to write down a color palette to focus on. With Slade, I'll stick with navy, black, and dark gray. Everything is very fitted, but not in a wearing a size too small to show off defined pecs kind of a way. More like in a tailored uniform kind of a way. Though who knows what might be hiding under that plain gray suit and tie. Maybe he is shredded. Seeing as that's not going to come up in the book, we may never know. I'm sorry to leave you all in suspense. But now that we know what Slade looks like, we can move on to the next step, his personality. Once again, I break this down into several different categories: strengths, weaknesses, and personality traits. If he was a main character, I would also add a fourth category, which I call the lesson. This is like his character arc. Slade obviously isn't a main character, but for the example of this video, let's say that he is and break down that as well. First, I choose his strengths and weaknesses. I like to do these at the same time as I find they often overlap. Someone who has good listener as a strength might have doesn't speak up as a weakness, the same way that I have the opposite, if you can count talks a lot as a strength. Slade's strengths will stem from his experience. He's been doing this job for a long time, after all. He's good at reading people, keeping a level head in stressful situations, and noticing patterns. But at the same time, this is also where his weaknesses will stem from. He's not very understanding of problems he doesn't deem important and has little empathy for people who can't handle the pressure. He's no nonsense and all business, which can be helpful in managing his job, but tends to put him on the back foot in social situations, especially those outside of work. After spending the last day and a half tracking down a magical fugitive capable of leveling a city block, he doesn't have much patience or sympathy for your story about being cut in front of at line in the grocery store, Deborah. We can move on to his personality traits. This is kind of like a catch-all for little details that I want to remember for characterization purposes, but that don't really have a big effect on how he would approach a situation in the story. Like maybe I write here that he has a surprising soft spot for rom-coms and reality TV, and often unwinds after a long week by watching whatever this world's equivalent of Love Island is. Or maybe Slade hates shrimp and crab. He calls them bugs of the sea and finds them absolutely repulsive. It's these little details that you want to remember and that will make your characters feel more real, but that maybe won't have a huge effect on the plotline. Now, finally, let's say that Slade is a main character. Everyone is the protagonist of their own story, after all. So what character arc is he going to have? Maybe he has to learn to have compassion for people, even if their problems feel trivial to him. That seems like a growth arc to me. If you want to learn about the different kinds of character arcs, I'll link a video up above that walks you through different types with examples of how to do each one. But now that we've chosen our character arc, we lay it out and decide why and how to show it. Let's say that Slade ends up having a rookie join his squad and, while initially frustrated by them, slowly develops a bond with them and becomes sort of a mentor for them, building a relationship inside and out of work that betters the both of them. Kind of like a Captain Holt and Jake Peralta type of thing. So that's my character creation process. It's not too labor intensive. I'm mostly just jotting down the basics so that I have something to build off of once I actually start writing. Kind of like a foundation that I can add details to as I go. If I'm feeling really extra, I might use Pic Crew to make an image of what the character looks like, but usually I just leave that up to my imagination and the basic description I wrote down earlier in the process. All of this sounds like a lot of detail for a character, right? So why do villains tend to be more interesting? Well, hopefully mine aren't. I make antagonists and protagonists the same exact way. But it's still worth talking about why villains tend to get more attention, so that we can learn how to apply those same things to our heroic characters. First off, antagonistic characters are usually allowed to be more heavily flawed and more complicated. And the more layered and complex a character, the more interesting they tend to be. Oftentimes in media, heroic characters end up feeling kind of bland because they have to be good. And we tend to have a limited idea of what that looks like. But why can't a protagonist be heavily flawed, morally gray, and complicated? There's no real reason not to do it. We don't root for characters because they're good or heroic. We root for them because they're relatable. If we can empathize with them. There's a reason that people love an underdog story. It's because it's the most relatable and empathizable story for us. If a character tries something for the very first time and is great at it, can you relate to that? No. How about if they're faced with a difficult decision, like choosing between themselves and the greater good, but they make the choice of the greater good without a second thought? Probably not that either. But what about a character who keeps trying over and over to learn a skill no matter how many times they fail? That's not just relatable, it's inspiring. Or a character who's faced with a choice between themselves and the greater good and has to come to terms with their choice and the inevitable outcome. That's gut-wrenching, it's moving. A character who is brave, selfless, and perfect in every way just isn't relatable, and therefore we don't empathize with them. Do you remember in the last section when I chose Slade's strengths and weaknesses? Those weaknesses are actually far more important than any strengths I give him, because we don't empathize and relate to strengths. We do that with weaknesses. So what are your character's flaws? What mental obstacles will they have to overcome over the course of the story? Those are far more important for their character than whatever material obstacles will stand in their way. What moral quandaries will they face? What mistakes will they make? How will they mess up, and how will they come back from it? These are the moments and questions that make your characters complex, that make them relatable and interesting, that make us empathize with them. This is the answer to why people like villains more. Not only are they cool and scary, they're also messy and complicated, just like us, like real people. Villains are allowed to be more like us than heroes are, because heroes tend to be idealized. So who are your protagonists if you strip away those rose-tinted lenses? I know that learning this lesson made a huge impact in the way that I write and make characters. I hope that this video helped you in your character creation process. If it did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss my next video, which will be continuing in the same vein of writing morally complex characters by breaking down the show Andor and all the wonderful characters we see in it. Till then, I'll see you on the next page.